It's Joe, your faithful host and co-founder of Command Control Power, the longest-running Apple consulting podcast. In case you missed our birthday, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary this summer. For 10 years, we've been getting together each and every week to bring you epic tales of tech support and business management, and I'm pretty sure we've saved a lot of people a ton of time by sharing our struggles and solutions. Starting now, we're shifting our focus to the Patreon community. That means the newest shows will be posted primarily on Patreon. How do you get the latest episodes? Visit commandcontrolpower.com and click on support. Pledge monthly, and you can instantly subscribe to the weekly patron-only episodes right in your favorite podcast app. If you already support us on Patreon, log in there to get your special link and subscribe to the patron-only show so you don't miss anything. Here on the public show, we'll be featuring classic episodes hand-selected for you from our catalog of over 500 episodes, along with occasional new episodes too. And remember, we're regularly releasing new content on Patreon, where you can join our community of supporters starting at just $15 per month, giving you access to the freshest content. We feature dozens of exclusive shows on Patreon where we speak a little more freely about how we make business decisions, navigate client relationships, manage our employees, and sometimes deal with mistakes and difficulties too. Plus, as a patron, you receive access to our entire back catalog where you can revisit classic episodes and learn from colleagues we've interviewed who've shared their own best practices. Visit commandcontrolpower.com and click support to pledge monthly on Patreon. We'd really appreciate your support, and we're confident your business will benefit from the wisdom of the community we've gathered there. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy this episode of Command Control Power. We're very honored this week to be joined once again by Jason Harrison of Harrison Technology Consulting, based in Nashville, North Carolina. Jason, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
So we've been talking offline a little bit about managed services 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. I think we're up to at least 5.0 by some measures and beyond. So we definitely tend to go deeper than most of the managed services conversations we've had in the past. I think we've dipped our toe in. To me, I have a fairly limited kind of understanding of what managed services means. You know, it usually deals with some kind of subscription billing. That's one aspect of it, is just the regular kind of ongoing monthly charge for your services. And I know it also doesn't always necessarily have to be billed in a specific way, but that's traditionally how it works out. And it usually involves things like monitoring and maintenance and management of some sort. But I guess you have, I think, a much broader understanding of managed services and what it can be than I think most of our listeners probably think about it. So what's the kind of, first of all, like overview, how do you reorient our thinking around managed services to start with?
Takeaways for today will be more about thinking about how you can differentiate yourself in the managed services space, because obviously a lot of this started kind of on the PC Windows side many years ago. That's where we were. And so we kind of came to the Mac platform already well entrenched in that space. Took a lot of what we'd learned and a lot of the same fundamental policies and practices and different things to the same space. We apply them across the board. I mean, it makes no difference, what's going on. But the real key thing is figuring out ways in which you can craft your business around a model that works for you, works for your target customer audience. And we can kind of get into that a little bit, because having sort of the target customer audience is a key component of the whole thought process around how to do this. Having a lot of focus and knowing exactly who you want to work with, the types of companies, their sort of business structures, things like that. And then wrapping the managed services concepts around that and expanding on them and extending them beyond just the monitoring, just the routine stuff. A lot of that stuff we even look at as sort of like, okay, that's the foundation. This is the stuff that just needs to get done to make sure that customers and clients have smooth operating environments to really get down to the real meat of what they do. And then we step into that space of helping them leverage and better utilize what technologies they've invested in, and taking it sort of to that next level, and taking the role of being that virtual CTO for each client, helping provide them with guidance and direction and planning and, the whole 9 yards.
Now, when we last spoke with you, I think we had you on with Richard Wingfield and did a little bit of a managed services roundtable, so to speak.
That's right. Yep.
That was almost 2 years ago. I think you were calling it sort of MSP 3.0 at that point. And these are all, of course, just fun ways of referring to the stage
Sure.
we're at in the development of this area. But when you got into Mac consulting, you mentioned having been a PC consultant at first. And what stage would you say we were at the managed services business at that point when you got into Mac consulting?
It was shifting from like a 2.0 to 3.0 sort of era, I guess.
And how would you define those? 2.0 would have been once more sophisticated sort of automation, and tools became available, I guess. Is that the idea?
Right. Yeah. Because 1.0 was like we were putting what tools, what PSAs,
Right.
what monitor, we were literally cobbling together our own stuff, building our own database systems to track customer things and issues, and just grabbing whatever little monitoring tools you could find out there, whatever remote access tools you could use, and just sort of throwing together this stuff. And so this was pre, all the wonderful tools. So then that was pretty much like you clearly stated, that was 2. And then 3, I think, started getting into going above and beyond just the basics of the monitoring, some management, maybe expanding upon that management, putting together more standardized policies and equipment and things that you typically would want the end client to have deployed, so it makes your job a little more efficient at maintaining and managing all these different devices and different infrastructures. And then on top of that, expanding the roles of the tools and different things like that. So that, and then also too, probably starting to step into some managed security, which is something that we really spend a lot of time with.
Tell us more about that. What is managed security?
Well, famously, Macs don't get viruses, right? But it is managed endpoint security, so that for example, there's a lot of the different monitoring solutions. We use historically now for the last number of years, the SolarWinds platform, which famously snagged Brian Best and Mac MSP. With that, for example, on the Windows side, we've got a managed AV component. That's the desktop component of their security offering. And it's getting into the layered security where you're not only doing, what's happening with each desktop and each endpoint, but you also have something at the network edge that you've kind of standardized on. We tend to work with Sophos and the Sophos network security gateways. They're unified threat management gateways. We pretty much deploy them everywhere that security is needed, and that's pretty much everywhere, except for maybe the smallest client sites. But even then, there's fairly affordable solutions for that within their product line. So that gets into real-time monitoring. We know when things are happening, when any kind of anomalies might happen on the network, customer-facing network. Sophos has this great platform, which we've been slowly shifting into a little bit more. They've got a security gateway that is aware of the endpoints, and this is Mac or Windows. So if an issue occurs at the desktop for some reason, it can immediately shut down the outbound communications from that device. And so it adds this sort of automation layer to your product offerings that, would be pretty tough and pretty incredibly expensive to replicate otherwise, or if not impossible. So, getting into that. And so you get really deep with your customers. And this kind of shifts back to a little bit of what I had mentioned previously before the show via email, that really deeper relationship with your end clients, being able to step really fully into that trusted advisor role where they don't make a move with technology without picking up the phone and getting you involved in some way, shape, or form.
I have a lot of clients who have the opposite sort of policy to that.
Yeah.
They don't get us involved until they've made some kind of move, and then something's gone belly up, and then they have to call us. It's not every client, certainly, but those are some of the relationships we struggle with. But it occurs to me, a lot of the core of what you're describing here is basically just, it's like taking responsibility for X, Y, and Z, whatever aspect of the client technology stack, you're looking at, whether it's core of things, the network gateway, all the way down to the endpoints. It's a matter of taking responsibility as the IT services provider for, again, monitoring it, alerting your client to whatever they need to keep their attention on. Now, does it get into also more sort of like forward-looking guidance as well? Like, what trends for a client to pay attention to, what might come into play in their business, and they may want to capitalize on things. Where does it actually tip the scales into that more advisory role at that point?
It's all about how you approach the relationship up front. A great example, when we start working with a new site, we tell them, this is how we operate. If this is a good fit for you, fantastic. If it's not, don't. And we part ways and look for the next one that is looking for a more engaged technology partner.
How do you sort of make that determination with the client initially?
Most of the time it's particular business type. So we really like any kind of business that's sort of information worker, which means they're going to be pretty heavy on their technology use. Technology plays a very critical role in whatever business line that they're in. And, which ones don't these days? I mean, you got to understand when we define this was still sort of a variable in certain, depending on what industry that you might be having a discussion with or whatnot.
Right. Imagine you could have a company and get work done and you might not have any computers way back, right?
Very true. Very true. We tend to look for companies that are more B2B themselves, meaning that, they're a business servicing other businesses of some sort. Often this is engineering or some other sort of consulting line of work, say process and procedure validation, maybe in pharmaceuticals or, other professional companies. Sometimes attorneys might be attractive, sometimes not. They can be sometimes difficult clients. CPAs are a good fit usually. General contractors tend to be an interesting good fit, we found. Haven't done a lot with medical in that whole realm because that's another whole entire... You've seen probably consultants around the country, they can literally focus on medical and do nothing but that just because there's more involved. You've got HIPAA, you've got so many other aspects that you have to deal with there. And it's kind of a niche thing to a degree. And it has sort of special demands and special needs. So you really have to be very mindful and thoughtful about the types of clients that you're looking for if you're going to construct an MSP business like the one that we've built. Because it really does take a different sort of focus and approach than John Doe calling up saying, hey, I'm in a small retail outlet. And I could tell you right out of the gate, small retail is not really something we do a lot of, not necessarily a good fit. So you really do have to decide up front what markets, what segments, what lines of business, what types of companies do you want to be involved in at a really deep level? And where is your expertise best set for that?
And quite honestly, how deep down the rabbit hole you actually want to go. And I think one of the nice things about you coming here and presenting your knowledge and telling us exactly what your company does, all of a sudden, this is kind of a revelation to me and other consultants. There's more we can do here. And you may choose to do that or you may not. As I listen to you talk, I'm not sure I can become that trusted source for a lot of my clients. A lot of my clients, they begrudgingly use IT support and they always take any sort of observations that I make about their network with some degree of skepticism. So it's really a difficult line to become that trusted person in that company.
You have to angle it correctly. And you're bringing up a great point. So one of the things that we did, we were a traditional computer customization shop, whatever, way back when we started, kind of a value-added reseller sort of angle on it with consulting. And early on, I figured out, well, there's conflicts of interest here. Where do I want the business to be? This was pre-Dell even. I mean, this is showing our age here a little bit. 27 years at doing this stuff. So, we started seeing the industry shift and companies like Dell were coming in and selling direct. And so it just became obvious to me that the real money-making potential for the business was in the service side of the business. So we made that shift and that focus. Like it was probably mid to late 90s, I'd say 97 is probably a fair year to tag for this.
Well, that's a really early time to realize that, I feel like. I mean, I think, a lot of people have gone through that retail cycle for a lot longer with those thin margins. And some are still at it, even with the big box stores and online retail and all that. It's amazing to see some organizations still struggling with selling boxes,
It's a niche that I still think fits certain markets and certain places. Obviously, if it didn't, it wouldn't still be the way it is. Yeah, it was early on. Started seeing down the road, plus two, like you said, thin margins and everything else. It was a lot of work to make a little money. And sometimes it dovetails in nicely. I know that I've heard others here on the podcast, which they still work in that space and sort of do a little bit of both. And that becomes a little bit more challenging to make that transition, as Jerry was pointing out, into that trusted advisor role, because there is that perceived conflict of interest. He's recommending stuff that he's just going to make, extra money on, or he's recommending stuff that he's going to make extra work on. We always try not to do that, even if it means it's an extra project or something like that. We just listen, give the input. At the end of the day, we do work in technology, but we're in the people business. So the people skills becomes incredibly important, and knowing how to communicate effectively and correctly and have your intentions well known right from the get-go. We're here to help your company succeed. We are your partner in crime here, so to speak. And
Right.
And if you cultivate that, then it makes that transition relatively easy.
Now, do most of your prospective new clients already get MSP? Like they already understand the concept of hiring an advisor, an outside technology consultancy to manage things for them? Or are you finding yourself initially making that case, before you get into the trusted advisor side of the conversation, just to demonstrate the benefit of like having that type of relationship versus break fix or hourly consulting?
It's probably 20 to 50%, somewhere in that range, have some awareness, but don't fully know what's involved. And then the rest are like totally in the dark on it, don't know what, managed services is about. They're just looking for somebody to come help them make their computer systems work better.
Interesting. So getting into that point more, I think that's where a lot of consultants are struggling to make the transition to managed services, having those conversations where you're able to sort of demonstrate the benefit and the value in that type of relationship. Can you give us any kind of pointers on that, on when a client is expecting to call you to come in and just get them back online or upgrade some systems or whatever the case may be, and you are in a position where you might be recommending that ongoing relationship?
It can vary depending on the client, really. You really have to assess where you are with that client, where they are with their business. I mean, if you've done the focused direction on selecting clients that you want to target, then it becomes a little easier. And then there are going to be some that just aren't going to get it, which you so clearly pointed out. Often it is a big educational thing right up front, right? We kind of do a shock and awe kind of thing, because I'll sit down with somebody for the first time and say, this is how we work. This is what we have to offer. This is what it's going to cost you to get to that point. Here's a list of the benefits that you're going to reap from this sort of an arrangement. If you're good with it, awesome, let's get to work. If you're not good with it, let's have a chat and see if we can find some shared mindset on how to move forward. But in some cases, you just can't get there. It really does. It depends. And some people, they've had enough pain with their computing environments that if you can find that out up front, and then say, okay, we know from our prior conversation about all the troubles you've had, here's what this will do, and this is completely eliminate this stuff.
All right, I'm going to draw it out of you here, Jason. So I'm going to rephrase Joe's question.
Okay.
I kind of know what Joe's driving at. So you go to the client, it's a business client. You sit down with them at their computer and they had some connectivity issue and you resolve that. They're troubled by the scroll bar disappearing all the time. And so you go into system preferences under general and you say, always show, do not hide scroll bar. And that's great. And so they're happy. But how do you make that what is seemingly a quantum leap to all of a sudden you're like their IT guru and they're bringing you into meetings and you're planning the future for them? Where's that fairy dust coming from? Where's the magic? I mean, like, how do you do it? Give me a tool.
So an environmental assessment of their network and their infrastructure is probably, step one.
From a security standpoint?
Every angle, really. From a security, from hey, is this stuff being kept up to date? Are they following best practices? Are all the users local admins? Which is often going to be the case of a non-well-managed system, right?
That's true. You've got a lot of low-hanging fruit to pick, right? Right at the top
right
there.
Out of the right out of the gate. So if you get in there and get your assessment done, and sometimes you can use your RMM type tools and different things to at least get an idea of the software that's installed, the versions, and you can roll through that. And in most cases, we'll charge a flat rate to do that. Jerry, with your example, okay, we've done this and taken care of this stuff for you. We're noticing a few things here on your system. Would you be open to having us do a broad network assessment of your entire environment so that we can get a better idea of what's going on here? Maybe we can find some things that might need addressing. And that'll open that conversation and get that started. And then once you do, usually you've got more than enough ammo to make the case.
Yeah, I mean, some might go for it, and I'm not trying to run friction here, but others will just roll their eyes and go, oh, he's just looking for more work. And, and then you go through this proposal or this assessment and that you may have done pro bono, and nothing comes of it. Your emails or your reaching out to them goes unanswered. And it's sometimes it can be a real frustrating process.
No question. It can be. And sometimes it can be a very uphill thing. And that's part of going back to that focus on who you're targeting. Because often right out of the gate, once you get good at that, you'll know pretty quickly. Yeah, one of the early questions I used to always ask is, do you look at technology as a strategic asset? Or do you look at technology as a necessary evil?
Right.
That one answer to that one question will tell you pretty much everything you need to know. And sometimes you'll get a wishy-washy answer. Well, yeah, and today it's changing because it's becoming more and more of that strategic asset for virtually all types of business models and all types of business segments. You're going to more often or not get that answer than you would, oh, it's a necessary evil, but there's still a lot of the necessary evils out there, right? It's a toss-up.
Yeah, I'm sure that's changed a lot over the years too. You might have gotten a lot more of the eye roll. It's obviously a necessary evil. Who's this guy trying to convince me it's a strategic, advantage to invest in technology? Looking at it more in that outmoded view of like begrudgingly buying some computers in the early days, or upgrading them only like after they're forced to. You probably had a lot more of those clients early on. Have you had any sense of how those answers have shifted over the years?
Well, just the proliferation of how technology is touching so many aspects of everyone's lives now. Obviously, that's really changed that conversation literally from the get-go quite a bit. I would say, one of the last couple of sites we picked up, we got a referral. It was from their accountant, who also did the accounting work for a long-time client of ours. And they were just simply looking for somebody good to help them keep their stuff running better. But when I ended up meeting the guy and sitting down with the guy and his wife about what they had, what they were doing, ends up being two companies that were, separate companies. When I laid out exactly what they needed to do, they were a little younger than I am, maybe early 40s. So, kind of got it. They were using iPads and iPhones already, but mostly Windows desktops everywhere else, and just having all sorts of issues. And they were in a spot, generally speaking, it's about an hour from here, but it gets kind of rural when you get an hour from here. A lot of people would say we're pretty rural where we are, and depending on which direction you go, too. It was a very interesting conversation, and he was very quick to, once I laid everything out and explained how we operate, this is how we do. Either we do this or we don't. It's either we do it this way or you need to go find somebody else. Had no real issues with that. So it's interesting. The further we've gotten along, the easier it gets.
Well, it's also easier to get more selective as you just get a good, stable of clients behind you. You don't need those,
yes.
new clients as quite as badly as you might have early on. And, you also get more convinced of your own business model. You make accommodations for clients along the way. And when it comes back to bite you, you say never again. And so you get even more sort of double down on your way of doing things. And the more you can standardize, the easier it just gets overall managing your own overhead and business process.
Absolutely. Standardization is critical to really making all of it come together and be, I won't say painlessly manageable, but less painlessly manageable.
Right. Exactly.
Do you think it's possible to run this type of a managed service model with 1 to 2 employees, or do you think you need a slightly bigger bench?
Oh, yeah. No, you could. It would scale to any size. I know a couple of different people around the country that are sole proprietors that are able to run this with a client base of, 15, 20, 25 clients.
You're saying that it's important to buy into the tools. So if you're strictly Mac or you're a combination of Mac and Windows, what tools do you use in your business that you could recommend?
Yeah, the tools thing's always been an interesting thing for us because we started from our own cobbled together mix of things, went through several different iterations of RMM platform tools over the years, landed with SolarWinds, although they didn't have very good Mac support originally. They did have some, and it was at least a native 64-bit Mac app as the end client component. It was really kind of funny. I'd had a really extensive conversation with some of the upper management. At the time, they were Logic Now, so this was pre-acquisition by SolarWinds. And one of the co-founders of the remote management monitoring product they had was general manager of Logic Now, Alistair Forbes, and I told him, through that a couple different email conversations, says, well, here's some guys in the Mac space that are really doing some neat stuff. And I pointed to Alan and what they're doing with Watchman, and I pointed to Brian and what they were doing with Mac MSP. It was probably about 3 months later, and I was having another conversation with one of the senior product managers at SolarWinds, and she goes, we're doing some interesting things with Mac, and let me introduce you to Brian Best. Started laughing. And I started laughing, and I was like, holy cow, they bought Brian out, and he's joined the pack. So it was kind of a funny thing. She said, we haven't made the announcement yet. Don't tell anybody. I've been working pretty closely off and on with Brian and some of his folks there on helping drive the product. And I think he's got this thing really under good control. I think we're going to see some really amazing things from them this year, by the way. And so just kind of sitting tight until all that has the chance to move through the big corporate machine, as he tends to refer to it these days, because, when you're an independent developer and you're doing your own thing, you're a little more dynamic and a little faster about getting stuff out the door.
I think we all would like to see that. There's some other managed service products out there as well, and I think everybody's sort of experiencing some growing pains. And if you're patient, I think in the end, things will come to fruition.
Oh, yeah. I mean, on the remote management platform front, famously, Macs were always just sort of ignored from a lot of them for years. There was one that was out of Canada for a while that we used, a company called IT Control Suite. They were one of the first to really focus some good attention on the Mac platform. And I ended up working quite a bit with their lead Mac developer there, rounding out their offering there. But unfortunately, they had gotten picked up by Cinex to do like their partner remote management thing for all the Cinex folks, but it ended up their platform couldn't scale the way that it needed to. And it kind of ended up being a fairly big public challenge for them. So it ended up it was actually put together by a company. I think it's DSM Consulting. It's a bigger consulting group out of the Toronto area. It was a great product. Oh my gosh. There's still things that platform of product could do that we've not been able to yet replicate with any other tool yet. So, but with the SolarWinds thing, you can get a little creative with some shell scripts and some different things, and do some pretty neat stuff. Like we do performance monitoring of all the Macs through shell scripts and the check-in system. So we've expanded. You have to sometimes look at the tools that are there and what they can do, and put a little sweat equity into it. Build something that meets your needs so that you have a better idea of what's going on there. So. And there are a growing number of great tools. You guys, obviously, Watchman's a big player in that space for the Mac side. Does a really neat and has some unique monitoring features that we've always kind of kept our eye on. And then you've got Adigy. I had a conversation with Jason Detburn pretty early on about where he was going. And I think the only thing that kept us from really adopting his tool at this point was it was just a Mac-focused product, and we needed both because we've got, a mix of still Windows and Mac stuff out there. And we needed a single pane of glass that could pretty much handle, mobile, Windows desktops and servers, Mac machines, including Mac servers. And the only one that we were really able to find that seemed to do that well enough was the SolarWinds platform. And it got a lot better, obviously, when they brought Brian in. So.
Yeah, it all seems to be still pretty in flux. In many ways, it makes me feel like I'm back in the managed services, MSP 1.0, 2.0 days, cobbling together, what works for me, hoping that, at some point something will sort of take the lead and just do it all and sort of work the way I think about things. And just make it easy, and just be an off-the-shelf solution in that sense. But, in the meantime, we do have the ability with shell scripts, other methods to extend these tools. Can you talk more about that performance monitoring, system you developed now, does that report back to you when something, when a Mac seems to slow down, or how does that work exactly?
The developer from the IT Control Suite days, I stayed in touch with him. He had moved on to another company up in Canada. And, I reached out to him and said, here's what I'd like to do. Here's what I'm trying to do. And he took a look at it and said, yeah, I think I could whip something together for you really quickly. So I don't remember the details of it now, but basically what it does is you can set a threshold. And he wrote it specifically to integrate with the RMM platform that SolarWinds has. But you can set it to where it'll flag you if the CPU percentage is, over a certain amount for an extended period of time. If it fails X number of times over this time window, and it's, and so you've got a process that's gone south, right? Mm-hmm. And that end user is experiencing a hot fan blowing machine that's probably slugging along at not very good performance. So when you can reach out to a user and say, hey, we noticed that your machine was doing this and we found this running under the hood that, wasn't supposed to be doing that. And we've killed that. Things should settle back down now. Famously, Spotlight is good for this.
Right.
So, but it's impressive when they go, oh yeah, it was running slow. And the fan was blowing pretty hard. Thank you, And so when you can do those little things that mean a lot to the people that you're servicing, and this kind of goes back to, we're really in the people business, but we do technology, and it kind of goes back to the thing that Apple's always done. They're really, really focused on what's the end user's experience with the product more than anything else. And hopefully they'll continue that. I know over the few years here, they've maybe not done as well as they had in past years, but that really is a key thing. And we've sort of keyed off that thinking as well in the way that we deliver our services to our clients.
Can you talk more about the ways of thinking about people? I think a lot of consultants have trouble with this. I mean, not any of the colleagues I've met that I can think of, but in the past I have heard people say things like, this business is great. I've joked about this before. This business is great if it weren't for dealing with people. It's like kind of they get the opposite message there. People who get into it for just the technology aspect, like enjoying the tinkering with technology and being on the cutting edge and things like that. But people who don't like to deal with the end users as much, which of course many people would argue you're kind of in the wrong business. To your point, how can you help us think about, I don't know, is it empathizing with the end user? How can we think better about how we can impress our clients more and therefore be more successful in this endeavor?
There's a way you can always show the scroll bar. I know that.
That's a good one. That is a really good one. Or turning off the hot corners, right? When you're on a machine and things are flying everywhere and you're like, does this annoy you? They love that. They're like, yeah, what is that? Can you stop that? Yes, just give me 20 minutes. I'll be, it's like one click and you won them over. It's
exactly.
It's a big win.
We have so many of those stories, don't we? Basically, to address your question, Joe, I think it's develop it or hire it. One of the two. If you don't have it, develop those people skills or hire it. Get somebody who has them to be your front person. If you'd rather be that person in the back doing the tinkering and the cutting edge and not really wanting to engage with people on the front side of things, go to where your strengths are. There's a lot of different ways to get to that point too. There's some disadvantages. There's some real advantages for you, the technology person, developing and cultivating that. I wasn't exactly the most great at this sort of thing up front, but over the years, it developed more and more, got pretty decent with it. And just that recognition of we're in the people business and you want people to be really happy with whatever it is that you're doing. And so focus on that, focus on that side of the business. And it makes a lot of these other things that we've talked about today much more achievable and easier to get done.
And where does it go beyond the technology for you and just the overall, the big picture sort of role that your company plays for your clients? How does that people-focused approach form the types of offerings you make to your clients? Does it go beyond technology, or am I just reading too far into that?
It can, and it does. My particular personal background was a little more into financial management systems and things like that. When we started the business, all the way back in January 1 of 1990, that was pretty much the main thing people were using computers for. Spreadsheets, accounting software, some sort of business management database of some sort that was doing tracking of a particular business process. So there was a lot of different, so we've had to sort of reinvent ourselves over the years because of what was the needs of the time. So we started off more really just helping people put together an automated accounting type platform, helping them tie their business processes into that and making it work seamlessly. And then over the years, when we got started, there weren't even really networks in small business because it was basically dominated by Novell. Novell was a little pricey for a lot of the small businesses. A few years later that we started seeing more affordable networking options sort of surface for the small business space. And so we literally kind of grew up with this market, literally the command line days of MS-DOS all the way up. So the conversation, once you really cultivate that relationship in a really meaningful way, and that the people understand, wait a minute, this person's way more than just technology. The business acumen here is really strong. That chapter in the book that we were talking about earlier on is The Power of Business Speak. having your technology background, but then coupling that with a business acumen that you can then go in, understand a business's operations, their model, what they do, how they make money. Inside of those internal processes, how does the technology fit? Where can you leverage or help them leverage that technology to make an even more meaningful statement in their day-to-day lives and in their business, and ultimately lead to improved efficiencies, improved profit margin, improved worker productivity. There's just so many angles. And so when you get into that side of it, that's when that true consulting role really takes over. And that's what true consultants really do, is that it's not just the technology side. And if you're just focused on just the technology side, you're like everybody else, because there's a very large number of those out there that are just the technology. But if you can step outside that and go a little further into some other areas, some niches, some maybe areas that you might have a particular interest or a particular maybe subset of skills that you've developed over the years, it becomes a real differentiator that really sets you apart and makes it very, very difficult for that end client to ever really look elsewhere at some point, because you've delivered to them a very unique set of skills. Some of our clients we've had for almost since we began. Some, got bigger and maybe needed a more direct and purely day-to-day involved level of IT support. And then some, you may have come along the line and just didn't see eye to eye on something, or, whatever. So, you're always going to have those. That's just the nature of the work and the nature of the business. But I think if you really do approach it in a very thoughtful, focused way, that you're going to, you'll get to where you want to get to. If you're just taking in companies and work and whatever, it's because, hey, I've got a technology problem and you're a person who can fix technology, then you're going to kind of always be in that space. But if you start shifting that focus away and looking at, okay, I want to do something a bit more engaged. I want to have something that's a bit more meaningful. And at the end of the day, what this does is it drives your value up, and you become more of a value play than a commodity play. That's really one of the dangers that I've seen with managed services, especially on the PC side, is that you get the sort of, and I like to call it the Walmart approach, but very, very broad number of customers, but very, very light touch. You're not doing much with them. A little bit about their network. You're keeping them patched. You're maybe securing them in some layer, but probably not as much as you should. That becomes very replicatable and very easy to have them go, oh, well, I can get this from this other guy who's $500 a month cheaper, or whatever it might be. But if you start delivering additional sort of value added things in line with that technology delivery, and you're also managing their systems in a different way with, best practice policies. I can't tell you how many times we've had to go in, just as an example of that, where everybody's a local admin, right? So we come in and say, look, locking these all down, and here's why, because it's going to be a benefit to you. It's going to protect your network. It's going to keep these problems from happening. It is truly preventative stuff, because we don't want to have you calling us at 7 a.m. with this kind of a problem. Literally take over managing the software stack, when software gets installed, when it doesn't. End users don't install stuff unless maybe we've gone, like, for example, with Mac MSP, we've got like the managed software component to that. Then if somebody sees a tool there that's useful, they can go in and say, yeah, I'd like to have this installed and work with it. So that's been pretty cool. We've been able to kind of relax things a little bit there, because it covers that sort of thing for us. So, it goes to that sort of layer. It gets pretty deep. But at the end, you can create a really great managed sort of business that you're still going to have some surprises. You're still going to have some headaches. You're still going to have those schedule disruptions sometimes, but you're going to have a lot fewer of them. You're going to be able to make pretty darn good money, maybe with a little less stress. And that is like the holy grail for all of us, right?
That is the holy grail. Exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. It occurs to me, so what you're saying is sort of the more embedded you can get into the more areas of their network and just operations, the more tentacles you can have into various aspects of their business almost, not only the better managed they will be, but then of course the more indispensable, of course, you become. But not only that, it's also about taking a step, outside of the everyday trenches and getting that higher perspective to look at the big picture, also be as you're describing, a consultant in the truest sense, where, they turn to you and they want your advice on things. And that's not something you can put on a website and check a bunch of boxes, do it for, X amount cheaper, because it's all based on the relationship that you've developed with the client. So, we're in these positions where once we've won the business, we also have to earn keeping it. And the more we can advance those different aspects of what we're offering and managing for them, get them to look at us more as an advisor, the better job security is. You could also just keep a spreadsheet of passwords that no one else has, but that's not really the kind of job security that a good consultant wants.
No, you don't want that. Yeah, right. No, you've got it exactly right. And that's really what we focused on now for, I want to say at least 20 years, maybe more. And it was something that did evolve. I think the longevity here of seeing different things and different issues along the way, and all these various different client environments and networks and businesses sort of led us in this direction. But at the end of the day, the better managed network actually means that you're doing less of the stuff, say, that you're already doing a lot of today, and you're doing other things that are higher value delivery. You get involved in these other projects where you're helping clients really better utilize what they've invested in. You're not just keeping the fundamentals running. You're really helping them take that next step. And a lot of businesses need that. I mean, how often have we encountered somebody doing something in a spreadsheet and going, wow, that really should be in a database? And here's why. Because they just don't know. They sometimes will pick the wrong tools for the wrong jobs because they just simply don't know how to utilize technology that well, because they don't have that acumen and that background. And so if you can bring that, well, how do you have time to deliver that sort of layer or level of consultancy? It's by taking care of the other stuff, so it's almost non-existent. It's a very small and a very minor piece of the puzzle. Funny thing is that's exactly why we went to the Mac platform. Windows was still continuing to consume a lot of our time solving stupid issues over and over again. We felt like the Mac had gotten a lot better on the business front. We were seeing more and more things be business applications and things either being available on the Mac natively or through the browser in some way, shape, or form. And, just said, hey, it's time. We want less trouble at the desktop. We want less trouble at a server. We just want to let the things run smoothly there. And we want to be able to spend more time doing those higher value service delivery type things.
So once you've freed up that time by automating things and just doing a better job of the overall management, and made yourself available, to observe the clients and make recommendations on their workflows and things like that, and optimizing their business processes, how do you, where do you make those observations? Like in your example of, using a spreadsheet where a database would be a better fit, is that, sort of haphazard on a daily basis? You just happen to be walking by the client, or do you deliberately sort of, shoulder surf with clients in a certain position at your client locations to be able to observe them and make recommendations that might help them?
Oh, it's more deliberate than that. I'll say, show me how you do this. Mm-hmm. Whatever it might be. How are you doing this? How, what do you use? How do you track this? I know you guys do this. I might see some little aspect of it that might key me off on thinking, I wonder why they do it that way. Right. And so I'll just be pretty deliberate about it and say, hey, let's schedule a time. I can come hang out a little bit one afternoon, take a look at how you're doing these particular things, and then maybe make some suggestions to how to optimize that moving forward. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Often it comes into all sorts of things get opened up. I get more doorways for projects and various different things that are, add on to the MSP foundation, if you will, from that sort of engagement than I do anything else.
Yeah, it's like that question we sometimes ask our clients, what are you trying to do? Because, because they'll come to you and they'll say, like, I want you to take this folder from over here and put it on this drive and then plug it in over there. And they're giving you like the steps to take. You're kind of like trying to imagine what the end result is. What are they getting at? If you take a step back in that scenario, I mean, you could get into something like that where you've done everything they said. No one's happy with the result. But if you take a step back at the beginning and you say, just tell me what you're trying to do. What's the goal here? You can really sometimes just really wow them in those circumstances because they think think they've figured it out and they've done the research, and you're coming from a perspective where you've got a lot more experience, and so we have to be able to take a step back and ask our clients that question. But in the relationships you have with these clients, I think that's a situation you find yourself in that a lot of consultants don't have. I mean, I'm rarely in a position where I'm on site just kind of hanging around with the ability to say, show me how you work and let me observe what you're doing, or show me, the workflow for this task you do every week, being able to help them automate it or use better tools. So that's a major advantage just right there.
And that comes from that focus that I was talking about originally, where you've really got to decide on the kind of client base that you really want to have. What types of businesses are they? What do they do? How are they utilizing technology? How do you foresee yourself and your organization being able to provide some sort of positive impact, above and beyond the basics? And so those are all some really interesting questions. And it does take a while to build that. Like you said, rarely do you have time because of how your business is defined and made. But so it is a process of shifting, but it can be dovetailed right into the MSP platform. Like that is the sort of the catalyst for all of this. Because as you pull people into an MSP scenario, you are reducing and cutting out some of the things that you were doing before, that was more repetitive and more whatever. And because you're preventing problems from happening, you're preventing these issues from arising by putting in great policies and best practice standards on system configurations and that sort of thing. And we always, when we first get started with a client, we do all those things, up front. That's usually the first few months. And then once we get beyond implementing those best practices, implementing the remote management systems and the monitoring stuff and everything, then things start to settle and starting to even out. And then that's when you can start having a little bit more of the conversation of, so how are you using technology in your company? What things are you doing today? Or is there anything that you're doing that you go, man, there's got to be a better way to do this? And so when you ask those questions, a lot of interesting things can come from that.
One of the things I'm hearing too is that because you are open to doing the Windows platform, and that's a lot of your user base, it opens so many doors for you for these types of conversations and for these opportunities. A lot of doors are closed for us because we might walk into an architectural firm or a legal firm and they're still heavily into Windows. And if we were able to do both, and I don't really know any Mac consultant that really wouldn't be able to do both successfully, I think that's something worthy of consideration as well. Maybe you should at least dip your toe in the water and consider doing some Windows support. If you have such a great product like SolarWinds that can sort of support you on the managed service side, it's a win-win.
Part of the whole thing, why we wanted to really dive deep into the Mac side of the thing, was a differentiation there as well. We knew that companies in our area were predominantly PC. There really wasn't a lot of Mac stuff in our immediate area. And so it was a sort of double-edged thing. We wanted to be able to provide a platform that we felt was a much more solid, stable, less problematic platform for people to operate off of. But at the same time, we wanted to be able to do something different that nobody else was doing. That dovetails perfectly into the point that you're making, is that it does help to have that broader acumen, not only in the business side of things, but in the technology side of things as well, because you're immediately kind of putting some constraints and some limits on the possibilities for your company.
So we've been referring to this article here as background for this conversation, MSP Mentor, billed as the ultimate guide to managed services, how appropriately. They have this article that you helpfully sent over, Jason, dealing with just kind of giving us the history of managed services and the development of it. And I think it will be especially informative to a lot of our listeners, focusing on the Mac. That we've touched on some of these, MSP 1.0 from 1995 to 2000 era. That's before I got into consulting, certainly. MSP 2.0 from 2001 to 2007, that's where things really kind of picked up. 3.0, would have been until 2013 or so, and that's around when this article was published. And then 2014 and beyond, they say MSP 4.0, and then kind of who knows about MSP 5.0, too soon to say. What's your take on, the beyond part of this? Like, where do we go from here? Do you see more consolidation as, these individual players are, bought and sold and acquired and so on? And by the way, don't mention Adigy to any of your big big name. We don't want them to get acquired just yet. I think we need to let them kind of develop a bit further. But in any case, where do you see that going, and what do you see the trends are, not only in the software side, the management tools side, but also just the kind of the offerings that we can provide as managed services providers?
I think the tools are going to progressively get better. I have a funny feeling that this year, maybe into next year, it's going to be kind of a real watershed for, I think, the tools. SolarWinds, for example, I know he's got, and when I say he, I'm talking about Brian and all the other, his colleagues there, they've got some really exciting things in the works. Jason Depburn down at Adigy has been doing some really neat things. So I really think the tools are going to, and Watchman too, all these are great tools, and they fit sort of different things. About the only reason we probably don't use Watchman, unfortunately, is that there's not a big management component to it. And we kind of need both because we do go so deeply in the managed part of it. But that's one of the reasons why we use the SolarWinds platform. And two, it was more entrenched for covering both platforms. Interestingly enough, Jerry, a little while ago, you had mentioned, and I'll get back to the main topic in a second, but you mentioned that, maybe we were a little bit more Windows. No, actually, we've been shifting so more and more. We're probably maybe 70-30 now, Mac Windows in our client base. And that 30 is rapidly eroding everywhere we can erode it. So, and for a lot of good reasons. So back to the tools thing. So I think the tools are going to be really good. What's the next thing? Managed security is really, to me, appears to be a real big part of like the 4.0 and moving forward piece. Really getting in and being able to help clients put in the best practices to avoid security problems, to properly manage and monitor security related things. When we do a managed services contract with anyone, security is part of it. It's not an afterthought. It's not an add-on. And we do command a more premium sort of pricing level than a lot of the MSPs in our area and many, maybe even around the country, because of we're packing a lot into that. Now, we don't do the whole necessarily, and this goes back to our prior visit here with you guys on the podcast, where we have a certain amount of things that get done for a certain rate. Then there's add-ons, but we pack a lot into that base functionality of what we're trying to deliver, that base service delivery package. And security is a big part of that. So, and it's a critical part of that, in my opinion, especially this day and age. So managed security is another big one, and that's something I think a lot of people could really benefit of either building their knowledge base on and getting up to speed on. Love the guys at IT Pro TV for training. I got to give them a shout out. They do a wonderful job. Great being able just to flexibly, jump on and go through some things after hours or on a weekend or whenever it works for your schedule. So good stuff there. Great security modules in there. A lot of the security training that I've personally taken has come from those guys. And then looking ahead, maybe some of the managed services guys in the Windows side are kind of shifting to being / an MSP / cloud services company, where they're providing some of that cloud infrastructure in some way, shape, or form, either through some sort of partnership or something with a cloud provider. It really depends on the kind of business that you want to have. We've basically sort of avoided a lot of that at this point, simply because it's almost to the point of I'd rather be the person that they come to, or we'd rather be the company that they come to say, hey, here's the business problem we're trying to solve with technology, and then how do we do it and what tools do we need? So the cloud just simply, in some cases, might be a viable option for that particular business problem. In some cases, it may not be. It might be more of, hey, this particular issue really deserves an on-premise solution of some sort still. So I still don't think, I'm not really 100% in this whole cloud's going to take over the world thing. I think it's just another tool in the toolbox, and it fits sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. So you've got that part of it. I really think it's more of an evolution to kind of maybe where we already kind of are, getting more engaged with the small business customers that you're working with, whether they have some limited IT or whether they don't have any. That's kind of, I think, where we are right now and where it's going.
Yeah, I love the security aspect of it, because I think that's the thing that I'm sensing is, rapidly accelerating the threats to everyday just, security, not only, financially, data integrity and things like that. Attacks are getting more sophisticated as more and more vectors become available and clients just don't know what to do. And if you can sort of manage that aspect, make them be able to just kind of sort of trust in the process and realize that they're not going to get themselves into trouble. Because if you have to train a client how to recognize, what's a safe link and what's not, I'm not seeing a lot of people getting more savvy about that, over the years. And I'm seeing meanwhile,
you're probably seeing the opposite of the bad guys getting a lot more savvy.
A lot more savvy. There must be a way to just prevent a client from getting themselves into trouble in that regard. I'm thinking of the vector of emails that get sent out and any number of other things that we seem to have been plagued with for years now upon years. I mean, pop-ups and things. People are still falling for them. If you can say to a client, not only are we going to manage your network and manage your endpoints and manage your day-to-day updates and just every aspect of your technology, but we can also keep you secure through these tools we have available. That's a huge selling point as well.
It is. And one of the interesting things that we've been doing in the last year is that we've partnered with a company that basically does end user training. 95% of the issues, according to a number of different studies, I know one more famously recently was one done by IBM, that basically pointed out that 95% of the security issues were issues where, the security fundamentals of a network might be perfect and all that, but at the end of the day, the end user clicked on something they shouldn't have clicked on.
Right.
And it was just out of sheer not being made aware of what these things look like, how they tend to be. The fact that UPS will not send you an attachment to click on when you might have had some shipment you were expecting to receive, or that the IRS is not going to contact you through email. These basic things. We've partnered with PII Protect. Through that, they can provide a branded service to your end customer where they not only provide training either on an annual or a more frequent basis. They've got several different flavors of the product offering. Security tips each week via email. Hey, watch out for this thing that's floating around out there right now, with a little 1-minute neat video that just sort of says, hey, So that's been a pretty neat thing, and we're still ramping up into that. But that's been a pretty neat resource. It's been something that would be incredibly difficult to replicate. That security training as a service, we got a new acronym, right? Is just pretty valuable. I mean, at the end of the day, you can lock down a system, you can properly design a network, you can put in great security at the gateway, you can put in great security at the desktop. But if the end user is just not going to necessarily know the right things to do in those certain critical situations, then you're going to have a problem. And it's going to manifest itself.
Yeah, no amount of of locking down a system or preventing those. It seems crazy that a stray click can be the vector of attack there. But at least you can prevent those kinds of things through technology. But the thing you can't prevent is the lack of understanding on the end user part. Through social engineering, you can get a person to walk over to the server rack and do something they shouldn't do because a person with authority in their voice is telling them to do it. You really do have to train your end users if you can. And that sounds like a great resource. PII, is that right?
Yeah, PII Protect.
Interesting.
They're doing a whole lot of different things. I know they've got some stuff that's like HIPAA sort of oriented. The user can go on, take a little bit of like an hour training, then take a little assessment test to see if they, how well did they take in what they learned. And then you can see some visibility, and then you can follow up with the people that might need some follow up or, might have not scored quite as well. And then they have another thing too, that they'll even send them little test phishing emails to see if they pass the test. Do they click on it or not?
Interesting. Wow. That's fantastic. As part of the quiz there.
Yeah.
Not clicking is the way you pass the final test, I guess. Well, that's really cool. So, Jason, we've covered a lot of ground today. Really appreciate your wise counsel here. You've been doing this for a number of years. You said 27. I guess you just recently this year celebrated your 27th year. Was that a made-up date, January 1st, 1990, I think you said?
No, yeah, that was when we actually first kicked it off.
Way to offend the guests there, Joe.
You didn't backdate. You just make up the date after a few years in. Like, let's say January 1st.
Yeah, we started on 1/1 of 90.
That's impressive.
Right on the button. So
well done. Easy one to remember anyway.
With any of these talks, it gives the listener a lot of information and a lot of different things to think about. And even if you just walk away with one great idea, it's worth the time.
Exactly.
Thank you for being so generous with your time tonight and speaking with us.
Well, thank you guys. And thanks for the continued work on the podcast, man. This is excellent stuff. I can't tell you what a great resource this has been just in general. And like you said, you never know when you're going to pick up some little tidbit that's going to make a big difference. And I've certainly picked up little odds and ends here and there that have been very useful.
Like the scroll bar thing?
Yeah, absolutely. That's just one of those things, right? Who knew? Right? Who knew?
Fantastic. Yeah, well, it does mean a lot hearing it from you, Jason, with all the perspective you bring to the table. And thanks so much again. And where can listeners find you online? Are you on Twitter?
Well, we have a company account that we occasionally post things through onto Twitter, but our website's just harrisontechconsulting.com. If anybody wants to reach out, touch base, there's a contact us form.
Excellent.
Please do so, and check out that book too. That was a neat collaboration that we did through the ICCA, and there's just a lot of some of what I've discussed today is in that book, and it does sort of dovetail nicely into what is your business focus, where do you want to take it. And so that's some really good stuff. And I think that's probably, the most important thing anybody can do is really bring some focus around what they're trying to get done.
Thanks again, Jason. Jason Harrison, Harrison Technology Consulting, Nashville, North Carolina. Thanks so much.
Jerry does his voices of customers of all kinds.
Am I on the cloud?
Joe spins his deeply detailed yarns.
I have a whole story about this.
Sam is on the road again, phoning in from a hotel.
At least we know where I am.
Half a century combined of Apple expertise right now. Right now. My Mac is slow. Have you tried restarting? Well, the fans won't blow. Have you tried restarting? But my data is gone. Have you tried restarting? I dropped it in the pond. Have you tried restarting? Well, my coffee is cold. Have you tried restarting? Well, I'm getting old. Have you tried restarting? I fell off a horse. Have you tried restarting? I'm getting a divorce. Have you tried restarting? Command, control, power. Command, control, power.
Jason, thanks so much. It's been really informative, and it gives me something to shoot for the next few years.
It's definitely some work, and it really makes you stop and think very meaningfully about what am I doing? Where do I want to be? What kind of company do I want to have? What things do I need to start doing to get there? Early on, I saw the writing on the wall for a lot of different things. And even with managed services, as that came about, I was like, as the tools started to come in and it became this big buzzword and all these different companies were growing into these big companies, but they were light touching. And I'm like, even though these companies are way bigger than we are, we could run circles around these guys with the value of what we deliver. So
you saw something pretty early on. That's the impressive part.
It makes you competitive against the bigger companies as well, because the bigger you are, honestly, the harder this is to replicate. This is not a business model that is going to scale super well unless you've got a lot of really talented people.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking about. I didn't want to bring it up while we were recording, but that did occur to me because, there have been times where we've had this discussion on mic where Joe has said, you want to come up with some sort of a business that you can, what's your parachute? How do you get out of this? If you have a lot of light touch business, it looks really good on the books. Whereas if we follow what you're suggesting, where we really should take managed services, all of a sudden it's more about you, and it's less about how many seats are you supporting, but it's more about the conversations that you personally are having with the clients. So if I could have put that a little bit more eloquently, I would have brought that up. But it's definitely, the other side of that coin, Joe.
Well, I think it's actually not so much necessarily about you, because I do think what we've built can be sold. It would take the right buyer, obviously, somebody who would share a similar philosophy, the way that they deliver things, somebody who would share the same kind of vision of the kind of business that they want to have. If you're just building something big and you want to, hey, we've got 1,000 clients and we're turning $7-8 million a year, or whatever it is, fine and good. But the idea needs to be you build it and get out, because that's not going to have a good long-term thing. Other companies are going to come along and outdo you at some point.
Yeah, outbid you, right, and undercut you, and then all of a sudden, yeah.
It's just an ugly business model to be in. And so it's that race to the bottom, and who wants to be in that mess? Great example. I mean, we've got clients who get tapped on, knocked on the door by other companies, and they give them their little pitch of what kind of services they can provide and everything else. And they're going like, is that it?
Right. So you're in a great position there. I mean, your clients clearly get it, but I think to Jerry's point, if you were to sell the business, the potential buyer is looking at it and thinking, wow, this is really built on all these relationships, and what happens when this key guy goes away. But I think to counter that, you just, it has to be more than just you, and it has to be, that your staff and everybody really gets it, and buys into that.
It's a cultural thing. There's no doubt about it. We're small at the core. We do a lot of outsourcing for a lot of different things like knock stuff that's outsourced. And those guys take care, that sort of stuff, either through automation or through some outsourcing. Some of those basic things get taken care of, and we don't really have to worry about it. We keep our finger on it, make sure everything's okay. But that day-to-day stuff's not necessarily there, for us. That can transition as well into some of the other areas of security management and things like that. Just lots of different things you can do. Like I was mentioning at the end there, the security training, that's an outsourced piece. We've partnered with a company that is producing that content, that's producing everything. It's relatively affordable, great value to the end customer and their staff. You have to look for those sorts of opportunities where you can too, where you can, for a fairly low cost, bring in something that would otherwise be almost cost preventative or whatever if you were trying to accomplish it yourself.
The other observation I had while you were speaking, Jason, was, I was thinking my client base, there's so few that would even want to have that conversation, even scratch the surface of having the conversation with me. It's like, how can we see you less, not have you charge us even what you're charging us right now? How can we still keep our computers going and have you here less?
Right. So, no, and that's a case of where you could sort of take the reins of that conversation, right, and flip it up on them by saying, hey, we do a lot more than what you've seen of just on the surface here. And we wanted you to be aware of this stuff because we think it might be of a benefit to you. You can sort of drive those conversations. Now, would some of those probably still be in that same mindset that you just shared? Yeah, probably. Some of them will. Some of them will go, oh, wow, really? You'd be surprised. And you probably know which ones those are. But differentiation ultimately is always the thing that makes the difference. What differentiates Apple? It's that insane focus on what the user experience is with their products. That's the key thing that, out of everything else you can say about them. Yes, they do great engineering. Yes, they do all these wonderful things. Yes, they have an obsessive view of this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, there's one simple thing and why they righted that ship in such an incredible way. And yeah, Jobs was a big part of that, but also, too, look what Jobs did. What did he do? He brought an incredible focus back to that company when he returned, right? So that's what I'm talking about, is you've got to decide on what kind of a business do I want? Where should I focus those energies? Where should I really be paying attention? And then maybe where are the things where I shouldn't be messing around with that at all? Just get out of it. Sometimes can be a scary and a hard decision, but like I said, you can dovetail it pretty nicely with that sort of transition to a managed, because the initial phases of the managed gives you that platform to build the next thing, that next layer. Technology is going to get easier and easier as it has, so unfortunately, there's probably going to be a lot less of the fundamentals to do in the next 10 years. And so what are we going to do? And the key thing I always see most people struggling with that you can't automate, okay, what technology is really the best choice for this particular role? Whatever it is you're doing. A lot of people struggle with that one. A lot of misuse of technology.
Right. And that's where we come in as the trusted advisors to guide our clients through these, these
exactly.
different options and things. And
exactly. I don't think the MSP or that side of thing is going to go away anytime soon. It's just going to get easier and it's going to change a little bit.
Right, and therefore it'll get cheaper and more, it'll be more commoditized, and from the client's perspective, they'll have more options, and we better be in a position to differentiate ourselves and be indispensable at that point, or they will be looking elsewhere.
I'll give you guys a little extra tip too. Out of the 27 years, we're probably on our 4th or 5th version of our company. What we started doing in 1990, we still do little elements of that today, but not much. What we were doing in the late 90s, there's a little more elements of that still going on today, but still only a small fraction. It's just been the last 5-6 years that are really the core of what we're doing today. And part of that is the evolution of technology, and how pervasive and ubiquitous it has become in everyday lives. Part of that is the shifts that we've strategically made along the way in our focus and our business model and what we were looking to achieve, shifting it a little. Sometimes you have to give it a little nudge in a particular direction to meet the current trends that are taking place or the other external factors that might be shifting it in a new direction.
You have to be nimble, and you have to kind of just be on top of things and pay attention to those trends and be able to keep shifting as needed, because you get left behind at some point.